Anyone get like nervous in like claustrophobic? You get nervous in tight spots. Anyone feel that way? Like somebody throws a blanket over your head, you feel like you're going to suffocate. That's normal, by the way. That's not abnormal. Someone tells you that's crazy, just say that's called survival, right? Does anybody get nervous in like small rooms with lots of people in them? Anybody ever feel that? You get that? Okay, so those of you that are raising your hand, this makes you nervous, like coming to church every week. It's like, I got to get over my fear. I'm going to go into a big group of people in a small room and figure this thing out, right? Somebody yells fire and you just panic, right? We won't do that to you. Has anyone felt trapped in a relationship? You ever felt like you're trapped? Raise your hand if you ever felt trapped in a relationship. Come on, be bold, be bold. Oh, wait, time out. Unless the person's sitting next to you, if the person's sitting next to you, don't raise your hand because they're going to say, who? And then that's awkward. Because I'll tell you later, right? When I come up with something besides you, right? You get trapped in things, trapped with people. I was going to take this little 3.5-hour drive one day and for a weekend event, and somebody called me and they said, hey, do you want to carpool? Like, would you mind if I jumped in with you? And I'm green every now and then, so I was like, that makes sense. Let's save the gas, and sure, like jump on in, like you can ride with me. Second longest 3.5-hour drive of my life. Honestly, second longest. You know what the first was? The drive home with the same guy. Like dead serious. Like, I mean, we've had kids throw up in cars. We've been through all kinds of things, and nothing compares to riding in the car with this guy. Like, he gets in the car with me, and I just have to say, like at the end of this drive, at the end of the first leg, like to get where we were going, I see this one really good friend of mine, and I went up to him and I said, I think he saw it in my face. He's like, are you okay? Like you look halfway between sick and angry and murderous. And I said, man, I've never been on such a crazy, like I'd never wanted out of a car so bad in my life, right? Some of you have people like this in your life, and some of you don't, and you think I'm a bad pastor for saying that there are people like this in my life, but I'm just telling you, if you were me, you would have been murderous too, like whatever that really means. You would have thought the same thing. He looks at me and I'm like, man, I feel like I've been in trains, planes, and automobiles. Like, that's what it felt like. I got a new best friend, and he was like a cross between Patrick Starfish, SpongeBob's friend, right? And Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber. It was like this mashup. And simultaneously, I think he thinks he's as brilliant as Carl Sagan. And so, like, I've got this guy that thinks he's really smart, but he sounds like Patrick the Starfish, right? And I'm like, we're driving in the car, and I'm not kidding. No matter what we talked about, he was, like, smarter than me, right? I got the right answer to this, or he disagreed. Well, I happen to disagree. No matter what, it was like, I could have said the sky was blue. It was like one of those times where you're just like, where did you come from? How do you make it this long without somebody besides me killing you, right? Like, this guy's married, and he's like actually producing offspring, and I'm just like, this shouldn't be allowed, you know? So I remember telling my buddy that I was with over the couple of days, we went to this place, and actually the whole time I'm just thinking, I gotta go home with this guy. Like, I have to do it again, you know? And so I'm preparing myself. I'm like getting amped up, like I can do this. Like some people endure all kinds of things. I can endure this, right? This is my suffering, my cross that I'm bearing for Jesus, whatever. I don't know. I was whatever I could think of. And so we got in the car, and I remember, okay, I'm gonna attack this thing head on. So we're gonna start with music, because music is like universal language. Except for this guy, I turn on music, and no matter what I put on, like my favorite songs, oh, this is a stupid song. He talks like Patrick Starfish. Say, that's dumb. Hey, SpongeBob. Yeah, that's all I got the whole time. And so we're driving in the car. I'm like, so the radio thing's not working. The conversation thing's not working. There was actually a point where we're driving, and I honestly was just thinking, somebody call me. I know it's illegal to talk on my phone while I'm driving, but please, tell a marketer. Somebody give my name to somebody in India that wants to sell me a credit card. Just anyone to talk to besides this guy. Like right now, this is driving me absolutely nuts. I actually did at one point, looked at him, I said, hey, now would be a great time for you to call your wife and just check in with her and see how she's doing. Because maybe she'll listen to you for 10 minutes and give me a break. Like, honestly, I was going nuts. I know by this point, I've lost all my credibility with most of you. Pull up to his house, he gets out of the car, and it was just like, you ever had that feeling? You know what I'm talking about? Like your in-laws just finally left, right? Some of you, your in-laws are here, so you can't really laugh, but you know what I'm talking about, right? You go, oh man, I'm just like, you feel like peace, like relief, like First thing I did, while I was driving, I called my buddy who I had told about, I'd said, man, this is driving. I called him and he goes, how was the drive? And I said, are you kidding me? I'd rather have bamboo shoots shoved up my fingernails than ever do this again. It will never happen again. And he goes, come on, man, it couldn't have been that. I'm like, it's that bad. He goes, man, I would have just had fun with it. Fun with it? Fun with it? How do you have fun with this? What do you do? And I actually said that because at this point I'm exasperated. I am so tired. I said, what would you do to have fun with this? And he goes, I'd have made a game out of it, I would have seen if I could get him to say a certain word, a certain number of times. And he comes up, and I'm like, you act like this happens to you a lot. And he said, it does. It happens all the time. I'm like, does it ever happen with me? Do you ever do this? Is that what you're doing with me? Is that this sort of thing? He's like, no. But it was so funny because I just remember looking back on that and I was like, man, he had such a different perspective of getting through such a difficult situation or circumstance than I did. For me, it was just, I can't get there fast enough. I mean, we were 120 miles an hour in my Buick Century, right? Flying across Eastern Washington because we're getting home and I'm getting you out of my car. And he was like, yeah, he's there. I just would have had fun with the scenario. One of the things interesting about life in general, and the reason I tell this story is because I think a lot of times in life, we spend some time through situations, or we spend our energy through certain seasons of life, and all we can think about is when I get to drop this person off. And maybe it's not a person literally, maybe it's just figuratively, it's a scenario or a situation, but we find ourselves going through seasons when whether it's relationships that have unraveled and it's creating some sort of crisis or tension, or whether it's a work scenario or something financial, or maybe it's just that we're raising kids and life is chaotic, or maybe it's just that life in general isn't making sense. The way that most of us handle this is that we just imagine getting to this point when we get to pull up at the front door of whatever that problem is, open up and say, whew, I hope that's over so I can get back to living life. Now, what's interesting about that is that because we think that way, because we feel that way about life, we miss out on a lot of what life is really about. We spend a lot of time in the middle of seasons of life actually missing out on what that was supposed to actually be because of it. Now, there is something that contributes to this in our culture. In our culture, and for most people, for a lot of people, we try to get through the situation. We try to get through the circumstance, whatever it is. We want to get to this point where we can just breathe easy, because for most of us, this is true. Maybe not all of you, and maybe some of you are going to go, no, I disagree. Some of you may disagree, and then maybe by the time we're done, you might agree with me. But for most of us, I think the reason that we feel that way is that we believe that life is ultimately supposed to be comfortable. That's the underlying value inside of us that says, I don't want to spend much time in this difficult circumstance or this difficult season. I don't want to have to spend too much time working on the relationship or sorting out the chaos. I want to get to this place. There's this thinking inside of us that says there's some place out there when this will all be over. And it's because so many of us believe that the purpose of life, that the reason that we're working so hard and organizing and doing all the things we're doing is so that we can get to a place where life is just a little more comfortable, where the pace eases up, where things aren't as complicated for us as they are in the current season that we're in. We think comfort is the objective. There's a better spot down there. Somewhere out there, there's a better place where there is just a little more time and a little less stress, right? A little more money and a fewer bills, right? There's a place out there where that exists. It exists for somebody and hopefully for me, right? A place where we get to actually do what we want to do and less of what we don't want to do. We start thinking that comfort and a life like that is what the goal is. That's what we believe. And it's something that's hardwired into our culture. You grew up in our culture, and it's difficult really to believe anything else. Turn the TV on for 15 minutes and watch a few commercials. Everything's about comfort, right? Everything is about your life getting better, simpler, cleaner. We can make this more comfortable for you if you will just buy our product. And we don't really think this way until we think counterintuitively about it. When was the last time you turned on the TV and somebody said, buy our car, and you'll feel every bump in the road, and the engine will fall apart after 50,000 miles, right? They don't say that to you, right? No one says that, because you see it uncomfortable, driving our car and your back will hurt for days. Wait, what? No, every car commercial talks about what? The ride, the comfort, how wonderful it is to sit in these leather-appointed seats, right? Or your bank. Like, there's no bank out there that goes, listen, here's what we want you to do. We want you to get the runaround week in, week out. We want you to feel as if you're being charged for things that you didn't even knew existed. We want the money in your checking account to disappear, to vanish without you even realizing it. And then we'll tell you about it years later. Oh, and we'll fine you for asking questions about it, right? Like, no bank does that, right? No one does that. No one says, we want you to get the run. Like, they don't do that. You don't see grocery stores saying, come to our narrow aisles and confusing organizational system and our deceptive prices. Like, people don't do that. And yet, our experience, right? Like, I remember, every now and then I go to the grocery store and it's confusing and the prices are deceptive, right? And money does evaporate from my bank account. Like, all those things do happen, but it's so counterintuitive. Why do they advertise that way? They advertise that way because everything in our life says, I want comfort. I want ease. I want you to make my life better, right? That's what the American dream is ultimately all about. It's hardwired into this. Just make me comfortable. Make me more comfortable. That's the goal. There's a couple problems with this. The first one being that life isn't comfortable. It never is. That's why they can tell you there's a more comfortable car. You bought your car because you thought it was comfortable. It's not comfortable, is it? And your bank does take your money, and the grocery store is confusing. Like, those kinds of things, that does happen, right? Like, life isn't comfortable. Like, you can try to sort everything out. You can try to organize, systematize. You can get your planner out. You can organize everything in your life to try to create the most comfortable scenario possible. And everybody reaches this crisis where you look at all of your efforts and you realize it's all for naught. It didn't work. Like, there's just still stuff that comes up, and I'm still uncomfortable, and life is never quite perfect enough. We're never going to experience that. And so that's one problem, is life just is uncomfortable. That's just the reality. Some of you are just like right now going, no, right? If this is news for you, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, right? But that's the reality. That's just life's uncomfortable. That's one of the problems. The second problem is this. The second problem is way bigger than just life being uncomfortable. The second problem has to do with what we do because of our misunderstanding. Because we're always working for comfort, because that's the goal, we continually put things off. We continually extend out things in our life. We continually say no to things in the moment because we're thinking that at some point in the future, there will be a time when I'm more comfortable with the free time that I have, right? Like, I'm more comfortable with the amount of money that I have, or I'm more comfortable with the job that I have. Like, I'm not working as many hours. I don't have as many responsibilities. Like, we keep thinking and telling ourselves, because comfort is the goal, I'll put things off until I can actually do the things that I think are important, but not until I take care of this stuff right now. And so there's all these uncomfortable moments in our lives, these relationships, these jobs, these emotions, these financial scenarios, all these different things, and we let those things push off other things in our life because we say, at some point, I'll get to do that. And unfortunately, some of those things that we push off are things that we really should be doing, things that we could be doing, things that if we did those things, they would be really, really good things to do, things that we've even been encouraged to do by other people, maybe even our relationship with God. They've inspired us, and we've said, man, I should do those things, but there's this point when I could be more comfortable doing that. We tell ourselves someday this will happen. What's interesting about this is that I have never seen this in somebody's life. I've never heard this part of the story for any individual who has ever made a significant impact on the world. Anybody that's ever really made a difference. Anybody that's ever been able to look at their life and have other people say, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you lived life alongside of me. You know what I've never seen in those people's story? I've never seen them do what they did because they got comfortable. Like, never. I mean, there's never a point where people go, man, you really made a huge difference in life. Like, you really made an impact. What did you do? And they say, well, you know what? I just saved up enough money that finally I could. Like, you never hear that. That's never a part of the story. They never say, well, you know, I got really, really organized, and I got so much margin in my life that finally I was able to tackle those things that were most important. Like, that's never a part of the story. What you see over and over again is that they knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing, and regardless of the discomfort in their life or the discomfort that that thing might have brought to them, they did what David does in the story that we're looking at today. We're looking at this life of David, and I think one of the reasons why we get so inspired looking at the story of David is that David's one of those individuals that we look at and we identify with because we remember him. And maybe all of us have some sort of desire to live a comfortable life, and maybe that's true. I mean, I think that's probably a shared human experience, is that we would all like a little more comfort in life. But you know what I think is deeper than that? I think deeper is this desire that our life actually mattered. Like we actually left a mark, that we made a difference. I think that goes far beyond, and I think we live in this tension, right? We're on the surface, and because of our culture and marketing and all these other things in our life, just more time, more comfort, more money, whatever, let's ease things. We feel that tension, but then there's this underlying thing inside of us, right? This unsettled thing inside of us, this thing inside of us says, man, when I'm done, like when this life's over, is anybody going to go, man, I'm really glad they lived life. Like, is anybody going to miss me? Is anybody going to be glad that I walked this planet? Will there be a difference made because I was here? There's this tension that exists. It's a lot easier to stay living chasing this one, because if you're going to pursue this one, it means you have to abandon this one. David in this story is an individual who we remember because he did this. David makes decisions in circumstances that remarkably shift our perspective on our circumstances. I want to pick up where we left off last week. And if you weren't here, as always, you can check online and catch up with any part of the series and hear where we are. But I want to start with the last two verses we read last week. I want to summarize a little bit of 1 Samuel 22, and then we're going to jump into 1 Samuel 23. So if you have your Bible, you can open up there. Old Testament, kind of at the beginning. And if you don't have your Bible, you can follow on the screen with me. It says this. 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1 says, David departed from there, and he escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went there with him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. This is where we stopped last week. David's on the run from his father-in-law Saul. He's living in a cave or a network of caves. He's gathered this group around him. We said this last week. It's really the top-notch group. Not, right? These are all disenfranchised, discouraged, downtrodden individuals, right? These are people that life has just not been going good. David has gathered the ragtag of the culture around himself. And then what happens next is they gather in this place. There's a sort of rallying where David realizes, like, our whole family's at stake here. He goes to the king of Moab, this nearby nation, talks to that king, says, will my parents be safe if they come live there? The king of Moab allows David's parents to go live in that country. And then as the story begins to unfold, the prophet Gad meets with David, and in this conversation, he says, listen, you have to leave this network of caves, and you need to go into the forests of Judah. How many of you have seen The Princess Bride? Anyone seen that movie before? You know the fire swamp, right? With the ROUSs, rodents of unusual size, right? That's basically what this prophet says to David. He goes, listen, you can't hide in these caves. You need to go to the fire swamps. Like, you need to go to this place where you can't be found. You need to run to this place. And so David runs with all of his men, all these 400 disenfranchised, frustrated, angry, indebted, bitter people go to the fire swamp to hide, okay? In the meantime, Saul hears about this. He hears about everything that David had done. His visit to Nob, which we looked at last week, the visit to the high priest, where the high priest actually helped David in his journey. Saul hears this story because there's this individual named Doeg the Edomite. And if you think his name sounds like dog, it's kind of for a reason, because that's the kind of character that he has. Doeg the Edomite comes to Saul and he says, listen to what Ahimelech the high priest did for David, and he tells him about it. And so Saul gathers the people around, and then he gathers Ahimelech, and he says, I can't believe you're helping this betrayer of mine. And Ahimelech says, he's your son-in-law. I didn't know anything. I didn't know there was this conflict between you guys. And Saul says, I don't care that you don't know anything about this. I don't like that you helped him. Somebody kill him. And this is an amazing statement on Saul's leadership. All of his men are standing around while he's confronting Ahimelech, this priest we looked at last week, and all of his men refuse to kill the priest. Doeg the Edomite, on the other hand, says, I'll do it. and not only kills Ahimelech, but slays 84 of his other family members. 85 people he kills because Saul's so bitter, angry, crazy, chasing after David in jealousy. One of Ahimelech's sons escapes, runs to David, and he tells him the news. David's heavy, feels the weight. This happened primarily because David had deceived Ahimelech in this moment. And so David is on the run. Saul has lost his mind. He's hiding in the woods. And that's the context of chapter 23. That's what's happening. David's life, in every category, his life is unraveling. And there's something that I like about being able to pause at this moment and look at what David is experiencing, because on so many levels, what David is encountering in this moment and what we're going to see is exactly what we experience. And when I say exactly, I don't mean that we all have crazed father-in-laws that are trying to kill us. Some of us do, but only a few. But just the general situation of being on the run, like this whole idea of being on the run. And I just want to say this. It's good to see this in David's story because we see this in our story. There are times when life just gets crazy. Right? Or is it just me? Like anybody? Can anybody identify with this? Like your kids are driving you crazy, right? Or maybe you're just so busy with work or circumstances happen where, there's downsizing and there's more responsibilities put on you with less pay, and all of a sudden you find yourself working overtime trying to, life gets crazy sometimes, right? There are health situations that come up in ourselves and in our immediate families. There are situations where suddenly our focus is completely wrapped around an ill family member or somebody that's around us that we love, and you just go, man, life just all of a sudden starts to spiral out of control, right? Or there are financial things that happen in our life, and it just creates this panic and this chaos, and we find ourselves working more and more, or we find ourselves working less and less and worrying more and more, whatever. There's just stuff that happens, right? We make commitments, we make decisions, there's consequences. Life just turns out this way sometimes, doesn't it? You just feel like you're on the run. Some of you, maybe you've used this. You've used this type of phrase before, you just say, man, right now I'm in survival mode. Anyone ever said that? Or you thought that? Raise your hand. Anyone feel that way? Man, right now we're just in survival mode. Man, I feel that way. I feel that way all the time. I'm just trying to keep upright. I'm just trying to keep breathing. Life gets this way. And it's when we're in the middle of those moments, I think it's very natural, because life turns this way. We get in these when this is over seasons. We get in these seasons and we think, man, when this is over, I'm going to just make a few changes. As soon as this is behind me. I do this all the time. I just think, okay, when this is done, when we get past this, this isn't normal. I'm on the run. And when this is done, I'm going to make some changes to my life. I'm going to make some adjustments, right? We do this. And I think it's good. I think it's helpful for all of us. Before we look any further at this story, just to go, okay, that's something that every single one of us shares. If there's anybody in the room right now that doesn't share this, can you find somewhere else to go to church, right? If you've never thought life's crazy, I don't know, just you must live in a different plane of the universe, a different dimension, right? Because this happens. David is in the middle of a circumstance like that. But it's what David does. It's how he responds to these circumstances that make the difference in who he is. This is what shapes the kind of character. This is what makes him this individual who leaves a legacy, a difference in the world. So he's on the run. And then listen to this. In verse 1, it says, 1 Samuel 23, verse 1, it says, now they told David, behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. Now, when they say they told them this, it means that while they're hiding out, word evidently comes to this group of ragtag warriors that David has become the commander of. So the word comes to them that the Philistines, this invading group of people, has come against one of the other cities in Judah, and they're actually fighting for their lives there. They're being taken advantage of. There's injustice that's happening. There's battles that are going on. The Philistines are pillaging the people at Keilah. And the plea for help comes to David and not King Saul. which I think is a really interesting thing because David is not the king. Saul's the king. He's the one that should be taking this sort of request and running to the rescue, but Saul's chasing David. David on the run is the one that gets the request, not Saul the king. And I just want to stop right here and say, if I'm David and I'm hiding in the fire swamps, right, and the word comes to me that there's this village and the Philistines are coming against it, but I'm running for life from the guy who should be there, I look at my circumstance and I look at that circumstance and I think I understand like something has to be done there. Like I know that like somebody needs to do something. I'm not your guy. Like Saul's your guy. Like it's in his job description. It's not in my job description, right? You do that, not me. Plus, do you realize what that means for me? Like I need to leave this forest. I've got this guy that's after me. If I go, I'm on the run. I'm in survival mode. I have no business engaging in this kind of activity when I'm on the run against Saul's armies. No way. My life is way too out of sorts for me to do this. This is where David shows us something really different. Verse 2, David hears this and it says, "Therefore David inquired of the Lord, shall I go attack these Philistines?" I love this part, that David actually hears this, and he doesn't pull out his day planner, right? So those of you that are a little younger, it's like the calendar app on your iPhone, but he doesn't pull out his planner, right? Just showing my age. He doesn't pull it out and go, man, there's just no way. We've got the ROUSs to defeat. We've got, all these different things. We're throwing a birthday party for, he doesn't do this. David hears about this, and the first thing David does, despite his circumstances, is take it to God. And he says, God, what do you want me to do about this? You've obviously brought this to my attention for a reason. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to handle this? So David inquired of the Lord, should I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah. First of all, the fact that David even considers it, I think, is just so unbelievable and so remarkable. He actually prays and says, do I do this? Where so many of us, our immediate response would have been, there's no way I'm the one to do this. I understand that there's stuff happening. I know this is a bad scenario. I'm not your guy. But not David. David looks at this totally differently. David hears about the injustice and he prays, God, what do you want me to do about this? What's my role in this? And every outward appearance says this is insane for him to do. He's in enough trouble with Saul. He's got this army of men that are just, you talk about thin resumes, right? And bad experience. They're just angry. That's the only reason they want to fight. And he's got that for a group of warriors. And he's going to be out in the open to fight or be vulnerable to Saul. God confirms this. And then David goes to his men and he tells them, he goes, okay, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. Verse 3 says, but David's men said to him, anytime you hear but David's men, they're seeing things the way that we would see them, right? But David's men said to him, behold, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? David's men wait, time out. Do you realize we're vulnerable? If we go out there and we get in this fight, we're not in a position to do this. We don't have the human resources. We don't have the financial resources. We're in this scarcity scenario where we just don't have what it takes. And David, he listens to this. The men disagree, and David listens. He's you're right. This is uncomfortable. We should be careful. And what I love about this is it's David goes, give me just a minute. And he goes back to God. Okay, they got a really good point here, right? They took my day planner out and they got looking and they realized I don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of money. We're begging for bread. They actually push back on David, and David goes back to God and says, are you sure this is what you want? Is this really what you want? Now, let me just ask you this question. I think this is really good for us to stop and look at. David's asking God whether or not he should go do this. But is there any doubt that this is a good thing for someone to do? Seriously? Here's a city, here's a town that's being ravaged by the Philistines. They're being pillaged, they're being overtaken. There's no doubt. There's nobody on any sort of moral level that would look at this situation and say, is this a good thing? Is this a right thing for them to do? There's injustice that's being done. And yes, it's somebody else's job, but something needs to be done. That's the scenario. There's no doubt that something needs to be done. Like, this is one of those situations you look at and you go, this is absolutely something that has to be addressed. Like, somebody needs to do something about this. Like, somebody needs to do something about this. The question for David, and the question that he's asking while he's on the run, he's saying, well, is it me? Do I do something about this? He's going to God and saying, listen, something needs to be done. Am I the one that's supposed to do it? Sound familiar? See, we do this all the time. Like, we're faced with these same scenarios every single day. You can't live in this city. Honestly, you can't live in this city and not be faced with these same situations. You can't drive 20 minutes from one end of our town to another and not be faced with the realities of injustice that exists in our town. You can't listen to anybody that works in our social services in our city and you hear about the number of kids that are living without homes, kids that are in foster care, kids that have no home, no dad to love them, no mom to love. You can't hear that stuff and not go, man, somebody's got to do something, right? Like, you can't go downtown and see people that are starving, people that don't have food. You can't see people that are just living in total addiction and in bondage to things. You can't drive past that and go, yeah, and I don't know if that's a big deal. You have to do that, right? Like, you have to feel that. You can't look at kids, like even our kids ministry, you look around, you can't look around at children and say, there aren't kids that need to be discipled and learn how to love Jesus. Or you can't look at the world and say, like, there isn't stuff that just needs to be done. Like, you can't do that. That's just this simple. The question is never, does somebody need to do something? That answer's always there, right? Like, as soon as we turn off the busyness, we feel that. Somebody's got to do something about this stuff. Like, whether it's in our community or it's communities halfway around the world, somebody's got to do something about this. Like, that is never the question. The question that we wrestle with and the question that David's wrestling with is whether or not we're the ones that are supposed to be doing something. That's the question here. Am I the one? I'm really busy right now. I'm really, really busy trying to make myself more comfortable. There'll be a day when I'm a little more comfortable, when I have a little more time and a little more money, and this is a little easier for me to tackle. I don't think I'm the one right now. I kind of wonder whether or not we just skip the process that David's in, and we just go right to the bottom line. Or do we really ask God and say, God, what do you want me to do about this? Like, do you really want me to do something? Like, is there really something, because I'm really busy right now and I got relationships that are unraveling, I got financial, it'd be nice if we could just kind of fix everything and then I could go do this. But that's not the question. The question isn't, are you comfortable enough to go do this right now? The question is, God, what do you want me to do in this? David is barely holding on, and he goes back to God and he asks him again. And in verse 4, it says that when David inquired of the Lord again, the Lord answered him, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hands. I love this. I love what happens here, because this time the Lord not only confirms, yes, I want you to do this, but he also says, I know. He's addressing and saying, I know that you feel like you're going to be at risk in this. And so he promises him victory. He says, listen, I understand that the circumstances of your life, maybe we feel this, our lack of education, our lack of religious experience or church background, or our lack of time, or lack of whatever we have, we do this and we say, God, are you sure? And God says, not only am I sure I want you to do this, but when he confirms it for you, he also says, and we'll get through this. Like, I will provide. Like, if you're obedient and you follow and you trust me, we will get through this and it will be better on the other side. When you ask, and I tell you, you can trust. So David, verse 5. David and his men went to Keilah, and they fought with the Philistines, and they brought away their livestock, and they struck them with a great blow. And so David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. David did exactly what God wanted him to do. Boom, you know why we're talking about this? You know why thousands of years later we still know this guy's story? Because in the middle of chaos, he said, man, I'm doing the right thing. I'll get in a fight. I will do what needs to be done to fight for the causes of God in this world. I will do whatever it is God's asking me to do. That's why we're telling this story. See, it isn't just enough for us to identify the problem. Like, I just feel like sometimes like around Christian circles and church world, there's a lot of Christians that sit around and they pontificate, they get into ideological, philosophical conversations about all the stuff that could be fixed in the world, of the problems, and people dialogue, and there's this and there's that. But at the end of the day, this is about action. This isn't about knowing what the problem is and adequately diagnosing it. And I know some will argue about all kinds of things in this, but the issue for David is the issue for us. It's an issue of obedience. Like when God challenges you to do something and says, man, I want you to go, and it's going to cost, and I know life doesn't look like it all adds up right now, what are you going to do? That's the issue. David doesn't go, God, can we just wait till this slows down? I mean, we could wait till Saul dies. Like he's going to get old and die, and then I could. No. I want you to do this. David basically says, God, this is your deal. You see it, I see it. Do you want me to do it? God says, yeah, okay, I'll go do it. Goes for it. But look what happens. This is interesting. Verse 6, little interesting fact, little interesting detail here. You kind of look at this, and if you were just reading it, you might skim this and miss it. But verse 6 has this real funny little detail. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David, Ahimelech was the priest that Saul killed. Abiathar is his son. When he fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. Now, an ephod is literally a physical garment that the priests would wear in their process of worship. It was something that had an association of being able to hear God more clearly. If we put on this ephod, then maybe we heard God a little bit more clearly than we did without this ephod. So like when Abiathar's running from Saul, like some guys, they grab a knife, some guys grab a gun, some guys grab a backpack with survival stuff. Abiathar, because he's a priest, he said, I'm grabbing the ephod because I have a feeling we're going to need to hear from God. And so there's this detail in verse 6, and then it goes on. In verse 7, it says, now it was told to Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, God has given him into my hand. Like, this is exactly what David's men were afraid of, right? For he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Saul summoned all the people to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. And the chaos in David's life just continues to ratchet up, right? Like he's being obedient, and yet the chaos is still there, which this is one of those moments, because we grew up in America, that we just want to say, wait a second, God, this isn't how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Like I do what you're telling me to do, and then my life gets more comfortable. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way for David. It doesn't happen that way for anyone that I know. The chaos continues to be there. There's Saul now plotting against him. And it says in verse 9 that David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him. And he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. I really like this. Because this is one of those spots we get to see, like David is such a human being. Because now he's looking at his circumstances and he's going, uh-oh. Like, God, I stepped out in the middle of chaos, and my men were telling me to wait until I have more margin in my life. I should have listened to Oprah and Dr. Phil. Like, I should have done some things different. And what does he do? He starts questioning, did I hear God clearly when he told me to do this? And so he says, bring me the ephod, because I need to pray again. Now remember, the first time there was no ephod. He just went to God and said, God, should we go to this city and should we fight? And God says, yeah, go fight. Go to the men. The men say, are you sure about this, God? Are you sure? Yeah, not only am I sure, but I'll deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Now he's sitting there, he's going, okay, wait a second. God, I need your undivided attention. Put the ephod on. See me? I don't know, like the ephod's like the bat phone of Israel. I don't know what, it's like immediately you're just going to hear me. So like, God, listen, God, like, hey, I got the ephod. I'm wearing it. Do you see me? Like, I don't know if it's like a vest for identification, whatever. He puts it on and he now he's like, God, man, did I mishear you? Because we do this, like we step out, like God challenges us. He's challenged you and he's challenged me. This has happened to all of us, right? Like there are things he challenges us to do and you go, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to step up. I'm going to care. I'm going to love. I'm going to put myself out there, even though nothing in my life says I have the time or the space or the money for this. And then you start doing it, and in the middle of it, you go, what am I doing? Like, should I give up on this? Because there's all this other stuff that just hasn't gone away. Like Saul's still after me. My job's still after me. My kids are still, like the whole thing, like life is still there. And so David questions just like we do, and I love this. But look at how God responds. It says, David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant. And look what the Lord says. Yep, he will come down. Like, is he going to come down and kill me? Yep. I put an ephod on for this. I thought this was a package deal. Like when you said you delivered me from the Philistines, I should have asked for the contract on Saul. Like you weren't clear enough. Like what is this, right? Like there's this moment. And then what happens next? It's so subtle, but any of you who have ever gone and you've extended yourself and you've sacrificed for somebody who needed it, you're going to know exactly what David is saying in this. And you could blow right past this, but look at the significance of this. Is Saul going to come down? Yes. And then he asks this in verse 12. Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, yep. Wait. I left the safety of those woods to put myself in the open. I came in a time when I'm on the run, when I'm sacrificing, when it's going to cost me to go save these people. And now when Saul comes and it's a question of their life or mine, they're just going to give me up for him. But that's not the issue. The issue for David is, are you doing what God asked you to do? Because guess what? There are times when you will put yourself out there. You'll volunteer with kids. You'll work with students or teenagers. And there'll be times when you're thinking, man, this is great. And then all of a sudden, one day, they blow you off. And you think, what? Like, what is that all about? Like, these kids are mean. Yeah, they're mean. They're teenagers, right? Or you go serve in a situation where people are impoverished and you sacrifice and you give and they don't recover. Or they turn their back, or they keep just falling back into repetitive behaviors, and you go, come on, do you know what I'm giving up for this? You give your time, you give your energy, there's things you do, and the result isn't there, or you feel rejected, or things don't happen the way you want them to happen, and there's this part of us that does this. Like seriously? Seriously? Like I put my life on the line, I came in the middle of this. Yeah, that happens. But that's not the issue. The issue for David is, God, am I doing what you want me to do? That's it. Do I have a dog in the fight? Like, am I out there? Am I doing this? Like, am I actually a part of what you want me to do with my life? Verse 13, listen to this. David and his men, they go on the run again. Life is still crazy. Then David and his men, who were about 600, apparently a couple hundred more angry, indebted, disgruntled, disenfranchised people, found David. And they arose and they departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could. And when Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. And it didn't matter if David's life wasn't comfortable. It didn't matter if he had enough margin or not. It didn't matter what the outcome, if it wasn't exactly what he thought it was going to be. What mattered to David was whether or not he was doing what God had asked him to do. That was it. That was it. That was absolutely it. And you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid that so many of us living in our comfort culture today, we are missing on opportunities to be obedient to what God's challenging us to do. We drive past the opportunities. We drive past the challenges. We hear things that torque our heart. There's stuff that comes up and we go, man, somebody's got to do something about that. And God's whispering in our ears and he's saying, no, I want you to do something about that. I want you to do something about that. I want you to engage the fight. I've got so many things I would love for my people to do that matter, that last, that leave a legacy. And if you just keep waiting till you have more time or money or both, you're never going to do it. And you're going to miss out on everything that God is offering you in that. Guys, I'm just say this to you just for a second. Guys, there are so many guys, like, we are just not in the fight. Like, God's given us a fight to fight. Like, fight for kids that don't have dads. Fight for kids that need to be discipled. You know, Grant talks about student impact, and I love student impact, but you know what blows my mind is that we don't have more men and women who are just excited about discipling kids 1 week a month. We have to depend on 7th and 8th graders to disciple our children because we don't get volunteers because we're not in the fight. We'd rather fight for a sporting event. We'd rather fight for meaningless things. I know guys that spend more time fighting virtual battles on video games, and they're never in a real fight with anybody. Like the only battle they fight is fake. And God says, man, you want to fight a real battle. Get involved with something that matters. And you know what it is. Like it's there. You know, psychologists have proven this, I've talked about this before. Secular psychologists, like people who have no faith orientation, have discovered this, that the number one factor for determining an individual's happiness, like their level of happiness, the number one factor is altruistic service. Doing something for someone else and getting nothing in return for it. No paycheck, no kudos, no manipulation, like you just serve. And we wonder why our comfort culture is the most distraught, depressed, uncomfortable, unhappy culture in history, because everything is telling us, just be comfortable, just put it off, there'll be a day when. And we're putting all this stuff off, and it's the one thing that God says, man, when you get a part of what I want to do, you'll find life. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, and he says, listen, there's 3 guys that passed by him. There's a religious guy, and there's a priest that passed by, but it was the least likely individual. It was the one who everyone thought wouldn't stop. Some of you go, you know what, I don't have the time, I don't have the mind, it's crazy, like I don't have the background. It doesn't matter, you know what Jesus says? Just bring you, like I'm the one that brings the victory. I know you don't think you can get through this. I know you don't think you have the time or the margin. But would you get in the fight with me? Get a dog in the fight. I got a friend that says that, and it's like, that's how I feel. Like, what are you fighting for? Like, is there a battle you're fighting? Growing people in their faith? Discipling people who need to break addiction? Like, are you feeding people? Are you fighting injustice? Are you housing kids that need a home? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And is anybody going to end their life and go, man, I'm really glad you were here? Not because you showed me what it was like to be comfortable, but because you showed me what it was like to be obedient. That's what David did. Just stepped out there and he did this. So what is it? Is there a fight? Is there a battle? And I'm not telling you, let me just be really clear with this. And I want to say 2 things. Number one, I don't want you to feel beat up. I don't want you to feel like you got to go do this thing. I'm saying this to you because I love you. Because I want you to live a life that matters. And I also want to say this, like, this isn't that every single thing that crops up, you go, I'm going to do this. And you run towards it and you run towards that. David went to God and he said, God, do you want me to do this? Like, is this something you've put on my heart and you want me to do this? Don't skip that part of the process. When was the last time you just stopped and said, God, is there something you want me to do about this? Let's pray together. I just want to give you a moment right now just to reflect and maybe ask God that question. Like, what are you fighting for? Maybe ask him, like, God, am I ignoring? Have you been whispering? Have you been shouting? Have you been driving me past things? Like, what does he want you to do? I don't think it's to get more comfortable. I don't think it's to wait till it's the perfect timing. What does he want you to do? Jesus, I just want to pray that we'd hear your voice. For some of us, Lord, I just think we need to maybe look at some of the circumstances we're in. If we're already embedded in a school, if we're already embedded in a business where there's just people that need to be cared for and loved and shown what it means to follow you, I pray that you'd open our eyes to those things and that we'd hear you saying, man, quit walking past that person's desk and love them, care for them. God, I pray that you challenge us in our friendships and our hobbies and our activities. I pray that you'd open our eyes so that we're not just doing it for us, but that we're looking for ways to transform those things into places where we can serve you. I pray for the situations that we come face to face with, the injustice in our world, kids that don't have homes or parents, or people that need a break from addiction, people that just need someone to love them or counsel or care. I pray for the situations where we just need people to disciple, people to love, people to engage in the kind of following you that you call us to. I just pray for all those situations that we'd become aware of those things, that we'd hear your voice, and that we would have the courage to step boldly in obedience and actually do something, to go fight even though we feel like we're on the run, to put aside the sense that, man, I know someday this will calm down, to just lay that aside and go, you know what, God, I don't care if it doesn't calm down. I want to do something for you. I want to make a difference. I want to leave a mark. Lord, help us leave a legacy in your name.